Mr. Shaun Flores,
Yes.
what are you saying?
I'm all right, man. Just discussing your interesting views about
come.
basketball.
Yeah, we're gonna come to that at the end, 100%, because footballers are fitter than basketball players. But
Factually speaking,
we'll
they're
come.
not.
We'll
But,
come back.
you know.
We'll come back to that. Shaun, I was just speaking to you off camera and trying to ask you, what would you describe yourself as? Like, who you know?
I would say a creative and a freelance journalist / podcaster, but probably political social commentator, I'd say.
So
But, yeah.
all of those things.
Yeah, I'd say I'm many different titles, a jack of
Yeah.
many trades and a master of none.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Safe to say you are in the social media space, or no?
I think as a process of the work that I do, yeah, I inevitably get sucked up into the social media space because we live in a time when people value opinions more than they ever have. You know, we're more divided and more polarized than we ever have been. So I think quite naturally, I'm in the social media space.
What is it in particular about politics that encapsulates you?
Well, politics affects our everyday life. I think even when people turn around and they go, I don't like politics, I don't care about politics, politics affects everything you do, from the food you buy, from the people you're able to interact with, for the what places you're able to travel. I think it's a bit of a benign and asinine statement for people to say, I don't care about politics. And I've been there. And the world we're living in, people are becoming more and more politically apathetic because I believe, most importantly, the way the world is going, the wider and wider we're being divided is the harder and harder we're finding it to come to some sort of shared humanity. So
tell me more. Like, how so?
Well, I think some people are so strong in their opinions on social media that they're so ideologically driven that they can't talk to anybody else who doesn't agree with them. And I think a great example of this is when you look at Black Lives Matter as a movement, which I think was a fantastic and a groundbreaking social movement. A lot of people who perhaps were still anti-racist, who weren't racist, if they didn't post up black squares, if they didn't do certain things in a certain way, people just cast them as racist. And I believe a lot of the terms that we use now are slurs, and we slander people too quickly without realizing not everybody has the emotional fortitude and the longevity to want to discuss politics all the time, or to want to be part of every different social justice movement. And with the way politics has pushed people are almost proven that they're moral, good human beings. And I think that's not the way for us to be.
No. I know so many people who know how to say the right things.
Absolutely.
You know, they know how to say the right things, but actually, you know, they are racist. They're good people, nice human beings, but racism is, I've heard someone describe it as baked in to...
Yeah, racism, sexism, all these different things are woven into the fabric of society. Yeah. But I believe even the conversation that we have around such topics are probably wrong as well. The way we study history, we study it from a lens where we're trying to find everything that's wrong with it, which I don't think is inherently bad. But I think a great example of that would be the civil rights movement with Martin Luther King. People would argue it's the right for Black people to be human, which in some aspects it was, but it was more so the right for Black people to consume in wider society. And what white America was able to do at the time was, what they realized was Black America at the time Black America was keeping all its wealth in house. Black banks, Black Wall Street, Black churches, Black wealth was astronomical. And what they realized was, via the civil rights movement, they were able to absorb the Black financial status into a wider American society. So it was a fight more so for consumer rights than it was for civil rights. But when people study history and they look at it a little bit more objectively, you start to realize that some of the lies that I think the media tell us really, as you said, the term, baked into our consciousness. And like another example is Martin Luther King's speech. I have a dream. People, right-wing commentators reference it as he believes in this world where Black and white kids will be able to get along, but they don't remember the rest of the speech. The rest of the speech, he spoke about Black love and Black unity. And some people would even argue that Martin Luther King was probably more revolutionary than Malcolm X. So it's interesting, but this is why I say to people, you need to read outside of your dominant world narrative, and that's a lot of what I try to do. So I describe myself as politically homeless and quite philosophically nuanced.
I love that, politically homeless. Love that, love that. So what was life like growing up for you?
I would say life was okay. My dad died when I was 6 on Christmas Day. So that was a big trauma in my life. My mum went through around 6 severe months of depression. So that was the first encounter that I have with mental health, actually looking back. And the more I speak about my stories, the more I realized there were certain parts of my life that formed me massively to become the individual that I am now. But I went to school, but I was pretty much the kind of kid who was shy, very introverted. I was quite nerdy, but I wasn't cool enough for the cool kids, and I wasn't nerdy enough for the nerdy kids. So I used to regard myself as as a floater. I'd float everywhere, and I think that reflects a lot in my worldview.
Politically homeless.
Yeah, politically homeless and philosophically nuanced. That's something me and my friends talk about. How in some aspects of my life when I was young, I grew up very conservative Christian as well, Seventh-day Adventist, and they have very strong religious views. And because they have such strong religious views, they can't hear anything else outside of them. So I believe one of the biggest things in my life is I'm trying to always listen to information that counters my own world narrative, which I think is okay. I believe we have to have some strong morals and values, but I think we need to stop being so set in certain ideas, because when you're ideologically driven, you can't see anything else outside of it, you know?
Do people, do you ever find that people try to like fit you into a box and maybe get frustrated with your political homelessness and nuances as a person and with your views and stuff?
Absolutely. I remember someone said to me, bro, where do you sit politically? And I said, I don't really know. Truthfully, I don't really know. I agree with some things that the left wing say, and I agree with some things that the right wing say, but they're both wings on the same bird, is a saying that I've heard. So I would like to believe that with being so politically homeless, I'm just trying to find a common ground that unifies and unites us. So a lot of the work that I do is about challenging the status quo. And the current status quo, I believe, is a lot more to do with cancel culture. And a lot of people believe that cancel culture doesn't exist. But if cancel culture doesn't exist, you wouldn't be able to take people's financial incentives away, their social incentives away. And I believe in some elements, again, cancel culture has its benefits, but I believe in the long run, it's a force for evil rather than it's a force for good. You know, when you think about what cancel culture does, it's very reminiscent of the Gestapo, very reminiscent of the Italian, I'm trying to remember that there's the Gestapo, the straitjackets where they used to shut down free speech in universities. And I believe, for example, free
under
speech,
the guise of like, this person's crazy.
Yeah.
So they can dismiss that person and the views.
But someone once, I also had another quote that said, when you cut a man's tongue out, you don't prove that he doesn't have anything to say, you just prove he had something very important to say, which is I'm paraphrasing it, but that's a lot of what I realized, you know, even in the podcast that I run, which I need to get back to later on in life, but I want to interview people like Tommy Robinson. I may not agree with him politically, but I listened to his Oxford Union speech and I thought I understood where he came from. He may not execute it to the best idea, but I want to listen to people that trigger me and I don't agree with, because there's something interesting about understanding why they've come to the person that they are. So a lot of people, get very frustrated by where I sit politically.
Yeah. I I was speaking to colleagues in the past about like, is there any way someone can help me arrange like a focus group or something with racist people or people who have racist views, just to be able to have an open and honest conversation about how they arrived at these views. And I think conversations like that and like the ones you and I having now are how we kind of more conversations like that is how we move forward as a society. Because if we keep not talking about these things and just dismissing them as bad, evil, this, that, or the other, can't move forward like that.
Absolutely. And social media is very guilty of this. You know, it polarizes us more and more. You know, you take a look at one thing you like and the algorithm presents everything to you. So it reinforces your bubble, reinforces your echo chamber. And knowledge has become like a silo now where people can take a look at one thing and it just shows you that. But So, for example, the issue isn't always necessarily social media. I think the issue of social media is the business model behind it, the paywall. When something's free, you are the product. Whereas if you pay for something, you control the product. So I think if we had to pay for social media, it really changes the way businesses market to us, it changes the conversations that we have. And even when I meet a lot of people, if it wasn't for social media, I wouldn't have had been able to have conversations with people like yourself. So everything has good and bad inherently in it. But I ultimately believe humanity is more of a force for good than we are a force for evil. So that's kind of where I sit.
As a kid, you said that you weren't quite nerdy enough for the nerdy kids. And did you say you weren't cool enough for the cool kids?
Kids, yeah.
So safe to say you weren't in a gang or anything like that?
No, not at all.
Like if I was to see you and stereotype you and think, oh, this is a typical black boy who grew up in a gang, that wasn't the case.
No, not at all. Most people think I'm too pretty to be in a gang. You know, something I get told quite often. I get told quite often I'm way too pretty looking to be in a gang. I'm soft. I look soft. So yeah, I take it as a compliment, man. I don't want to look rough and hard back. So yeah.
Oh God. So yeah, now go back to when you was a kid. Like, you know that question, when I grow up, I want to be a... What was your answer to that?
I wanted to be a journalist. So growing up,
even back in school days?
Yeah, back in school, I wanted to be a journalist and I wanted to tell people stories. So my mum, a lot of what I grew up with was Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela, not massively Malcolm X, but also Trevor McDonald. So the first ever black news anchorman on ITV. And obviously we're from Trinidad, he's from Trinidad. And my mum made him almost like a role model for me. And I valued a lot of the work that he did. And I grew up wanting to tell stories. I wanted to tell my own story to the world. And when I started my NCTJ, I realized journalism wasn't necessarily for me and the structured element of what it was. So that's why I prefer freelance journalism. I still need to actually pass my journalism course at some point. But yeah, I enjoy journalism and the story that it does try to tell. But again, I was sobered with the reality that journalism is littered with a lot of issues as well, such as sensationalism. And sadly, even if somebody wants to read the news, if it doesn't have a great title, you won't read it. How many people clickbait? We live in a clickbait society now. And clickbait works for people because it triggers us psychologically. If you see something that says all black boys are negative, you're more likely to read the article.
Yeah.
And that's what matters. In a time where traffic and data matter, you need to really bring people in.
Yeah, you got to draw them in.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It can be all black boys are negative. And then you start reading, it says all black boys are great.
Yeah.
You know, that's actually what...
But they got you, hook, line and sinker.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So Shaun, are you dating at the moment? And what's your dating history been like?
Man's asking me some personal questions.
Yeah, come on.
Man's trying to out me one time. I'm single for now. I've been dating, seeing where it goes. I don't really have any expectations. I'm more go with the flow at the moment, especially with everything that happened in my life last year. I don't stress myself out with plans and people. And I find that when people don't reciprocate my energy, it doesn't have to be my exact same energy. I kind of cut it to the curb. And I have enough options to be able to do that. That's the reality of it, right? So I'm lucky enough to be afforded the privilege in my position to have an access to certain resources and to meet certain kinds of people. But at the moment, I'm dating.